I'm Evelyn Phillips, 52 years old, and 3 months ago, my carefully constructed world imploded when I discovered what my mother had done with my daughter's college fund. The betrayal left me gasping for air in my kitchen at 2 a.m., clutching bank statements that revealed 15 years of lies. But what my sister Emma did next was even worse, demanding I stay silent to keep the family together while my daughter's dreams crumbled. If you've ever been the family scapegoat who's expected to sacrifice everything to maintain someone else's peace, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this particular brand of heartbreak. The morning I met David, I was 28 and drowning in coffee-stained textbooks at a corner table in Moonbeam Cafe, cramming for my nursing board exams. The October rain hammered against the windows, creating a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat as I reviewed cardiac medications for the 100th time. He appeared like a lighthouse in my storm, this tall guy with kind eyes and flour dusting his dark hair, carrying a tray of what would become my salvation, homemade blueberry scones that tasted like hope itself. "You look like you could use some real food," he said, sliding the plate across my medical journals without being asked. His voice carried the warmth of Sunday mornings and fresh bread, and when he smiled, something inside my chest loosened for the first time in months. David owned the cafe, having inherited it from his grandmother, along with her recipes and her fierce belief that food could heal almost anything. While I stressed about passing my exams, he brought me steaming bowls of his famous butternut squash soup and listened to me recite drug interactions until closing time. He never made me feel stupid for not knowing something, never rushed me when I needed to repeat a concept 3 times before it stuck. "Intelligence isn't about speed," he'd say, refilling my coffee mug with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "It's about persistence, and Evelyn, you're the most persistent person I've ever met." The way he said my name, like it was something precious, made me believe I might actually become the nurse I dreamed of being. Our first real date happened accidentally when I fell asleep at my usual table, my head pillowed on a stack of nursing textbooks. I woke to David draping his jacket over my shoulders, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon clinging to the worn leather. "The exam's tomorrow," I mumbled, embarrassed and disoriented. "Which is exactly why you need sleep more than you need another hour of cramming," he replied, helping me gather my scattered notes. He drove me home in his beat-up Honda, the radio playing soft jazz while rain traced paths down the windshield. At my apartment door, he didn't try to kiss me. Instead, he pressed a thermos of chamomile tea into my hands and said, "Trust your brain, Evelyn. It's gotten you this far." I passed my boards with flying colors, and we celebrated with champagne and leftover wedding cake from a reception he'd catered that weekend. Our relationship bloomed slowly, like his grandmother's heirloom tomatoes in the cafe's backyard garden. David taught me that love didn't have to be dramatic or painful. It could be quiet Sunday mornings reading newspapers while he made French toast, or the way he'd save me the corner brownie because he knew I loved the crispy edges. He introduced me to his world of early morning deliveries and late-night inventory, showing me how he handwrote thank you notes to suppliers and remembered every regular customer's order by heart. I brought him into my universe of 12-hour shifts and medical emergencies, and he learned to massage the knots from my shoulders after particularly brutal days in the ICU. We were building something solid and real, brick by brick, meal by shared meal. By year 3, we'd settled into a rhythm that felt like coming home. David's cafe was thriving, featured in the local newspaper as the heartbeat of downtown, while I'd been promoted to charge nurse in the cardiac unit. We'd moved in together, blending his collection of vintage cookbooks with my medical journals, his grandmother's china with my practical everything. Friday nights meant testing new recipes for the cafe's weekend specials, usually resulting in flour fights and burnt attempts that we'd eat anyway, laughing at our failures. Saturday mornings found us at the farmer's market, David charming vendors while I marveled at his ability to spot the perfect peach from 20 feet away. Sunday evenings were for planning not just the week ahead, but the year, the decade, the life we were carefully constructing together. The cafe became our shared project in ways I never expected. I'd work late shifts and stop by at closing time, helping David clean while we talked about everything and nothing. He taught me to make his grandmother's famous cinnamon rolls, patiently correcting my heavy-handed kneading technique until I could produce spirals as perfect as his. I convinced him to add healthier options to the menu, incorporating my knowledge of nutrition into crowd-pleasing dishes that didn't taste like cardboard. Our coffee dates evolved into business meetings, where we'd spread receipts across the same table where we first met, David balancing books, while I suggested marketing ideas. The regular customers started referring to us as a unit, David and Evelyn's place, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere completely. Those golden years felt unshakable. David proposed on a Tuesday morning in the empty cafe, the proposal hidden inside a fresh-baked croissant that I nearly choked on when the ring box tumbled onto my plate. We married the following spring in the cafe's backyard, surrounded by the people who'd watched our love story unfold over shared meals and countless conversations. Our wedding cake was a towering creation of David's own design, each layer representing a different stage of our relationship, from that first blueberry scone to the elaborate birthday cakes he'd surprised me with every year. By our fifth anniversary, we'd saved enough to buy the building that housed the cafe, transforming the upstairs apartment into our dream home. The smell of fresh bread became the soundtrack to our mornings, and I'd wake to David's humming drifting up from the kitchen below as he prepped for the breakfast rush. The plan was simple and beautiful in its clarity. David would expand the cafe into a full restaurant. I'd transition from bedside nursing to teaching at the community college, and we'd start the family we'd been discussing in whispered conversations after late-night lovemaking. We'd drawn up business plans and baby names with equal enthusiasm, mapping out a future that felt both ambitious and achievable. David had already started renovations on the space next door, envisioning a dining room with exposed brick walls and Edison bulb chandeliers, while I'd enrolled in education courses to earn my teaching certification. We felt invincible, like we'd cracked the code on building a life that balanced love with purpose, security with adventure. But even in paradise, there were hairline cracks I chose to ignore. David's smile sometimes seemed forced when his father called, the conversations growing terse and ending abruptly. I'd catch him staring at numbers on spreadsheets with a furrow between his brows that hadn't been there before, his usual optimism replaced by something that looked like worry. When I asked about it, he'd kiss my forehead and change the subject, insisting everything was fine. The cafe's busy season seemed to stretch longer each year, with David working later hours and sleeping less soundly. I told myself it was just the natural stress of a growing business, but somewhere deep in my gut, a small voice whispered that we were more fragile than we appeared. The call came on a Thursday morning in March, while I was getting ready for the day shift, and David was already downstairs starting the coffee. His phone rang in the bedroom, and something about the urgent tone made me answer it without thinking. Is this David Chen? The voice was clinical, professional, absolutely devastating in its calm delivery. This is Dr. Morrison from Seattle General. Your father suffered a massive heart attack during the night. You need to come immediately. The phone slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor as David's whirled. Our world began to fracture along lines we'd never seen coming. My family of origin was a masterclass in emotional dysfunction disguised as small-town respectability. Mom ruled our house like a benevolent dictator, dispensing love as rewards for good behavior, and withdrawing it just as quickly when we disappointed her. Dad existed in the periphery, a shadow figure who worked long hours at the insurance office and came home too tired to intervene in the daily drama that swirled around my mother's moods. Emma, 3 years older and infinitely more skilled at reading Mom's emotional weather patterns, learned early to position herself as the favored daughter, while I stumbled through childhood collecting criticisms like other kids collected stickers. The pattern established itself before I was old enough to understand its toxicity. Emma would break something, blame me, and watch with satisfaction as Mom delivered a lecture about responsibility and disappointment. When I excelled at school, earning straight A's and teacher recommendations, Mom would find a way to diminish the achievement. Well, Emma never needed to study that hard to get good grades, or I hope this doesn't make you think you're better than your sister. Holiday dinners became performances where Emma and I competed for Mom's attention and approval, a game where the rules changed without warning, and I always seemed to be losing. The favoritism reached its peak during our teenage years. Emma's mistakes were reframed as learning experiences, while my smallest infractions became evidence of character flaws that required correction. When Emma got caught shoplifting at 16, Mom hired a lawyer and had the charges dropped, then took her on a weekend shopping trip to rebuild her confidence. When I got a B+ in calculus instead of my usual A, I was grounded from social activities for a month because mediocrity was a choice, not a circumstance. The message was clear. Emma was precious and fragile, requiring protection and understanding, while I was strong and capable, expected to handle whatever life threw at me without complaint or support. The pattern followed us into adulthood, becoming more sophisticated but no less damaging. Emma drifted through a series of jobs and relationships, always landing softly because Mom was there to catch her, offering financial support and emotional validation. I worked my way through nursing school with student loans and part-time jobs, receiving criticism for my stubbornness in refusing family help that was never actually offered. When Emma got pregnant at 25 with a married man's baby, mom threw her a baby shower and helped her find a nice apartment in a good neighborhood. When I announced my engagement to David, mom's first question was whether I was sure I wasn't settling because I was getting older. My chosen family provided a stark contrast to the conditional love I'd grown up with. David's parents, though dealing with their own challenges, had raised him to believe that love was abundant and unconditional. His friends became my friends, welcoming me into their circle with genuine warmth and interest in my thoughts and opinions. My nursing colleagues formed a tight-knit community where competence was valued and support was freely given. For the first time, I experienced relationships where I could be authentically myself without fear of judgment or abandonment. The morning shift at Seattle General started like any other, with me reviewing patient charts and preparing medications while the overnight nurses gave report. The cardiac unit hummed with its familiar rhythm of beeping monitors and shuffling feet, the controlled chaos of healing in progress. I'd been assigned to Mr. Peterson, a 72-year-old recovering from triple bypass surgery, and Mrs. Kim, a diabetic woman dealing with complications from a minor heart attack. Both patients were stable, requiring routine monitoring and medication administration, the kind of predictable day that allowed me to focus on David's situation without worrying about emergencies. But stability in a hospital is always temporary. At 10:47 a.m., Mrs. Kim's monitor began alarming, her heart rhythm deteriorating from normal sinus to something that made my blood pressure spike. She was conscious but pale, pressing her hand to her chest with an expression of confusion and growing fear. "I feel strange," she whispered, her voice carrying the particular quality that every experienced nurse learns to recognize as serious trouble. I hit the call button while grabbing the crash cart, my training taking over as I began the rapid assessment that would determine whether this was a minor blip or a life-threatening emergency. The next hour passed in a blur of controlled urgency as the cardiology team worked to stabilize Mrs. Kim's condition. I found myself functioning as both nurse and translator, explaining procedures to her frightened family while anticipating the doctor's needs and monitoring her vital signs for any changes. It was the kind of medical crisis that demanded complete focus and emotional compartmentalization, skills I'd developed over years of critical care nursing. When Mrs. Kim's heart rhythm finally returned to normal and her color improved, the collective exhale from the medical team was audible, a shared relief that we'd successfully pulled someone back from the edge. Driving home that evening, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a job well done mixed with the emotional exhaustion that comes from holding someone's life in your hands. Seattle traffic moved at its usual crawl, giving me time to decompress and transition from Evelyn the nurse to Evelyn the partner who needed to support David through his father's medical crisis. I'd picked up his favorite Thai food on the way home, along with the expensive ice cream he pretended not to love but always ate directly from the container when he was stressed. The plan was simple: feed him, hold him, and help him process whatever information he'd gathered during his day at the hospital. The cafe stood empty when I arrived, unusual for 7 p.m. on a weekday. David's car was in the parking space behind the building, but the front lights were off, and the close sign hung in the window like a surrender flag. I used my key to enter through the back door, calling his name as I climbed the stairs to our apartment. The smell of unfinished coffee and abandoned baking filled the air, evidence of a day that had been interrupted and never resumed. David sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by papers and his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. When he looked up at me, his eyes held a devastation that made my heart skip irregularly. "My father died an hour ago," he said, his voice eerily calm and matter-of-fact. "You massive stroke?" The doctor said he didn't suffer. The Thai food containers slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers, landing on the hardwood floor with a wet splat that seemed obscenely loud in the silence that followed. I moved toward him instinctively, but he held up a hand to stop me, gesturing toward the papers spread across our table. "But that's not the worst part, Evelyn. This is." He turned his laptop screen toward me, revealing what looked like financial statements and legal documents. He mortgaged everything: the cafe, this building, even his house. Everything I thought we owned, everything I thought was secure. It's all leveraged to the banks. The numbers on the screen swam in and out of focus as I tried to process what David was telling me. Mortgage payments of $8,000 per month on the building I thought we owned outright. Business loans with the cafe's equipment as collateral. A second mortgage on his father's house that David had somehow inherited along with the debt. The total amount owed was staggering, more money than we'd ever seen or imagined needing. "How is this possible?" I whispered, sinking into the chair across from him. "You've been so careful with money. We've been so careful." David's laugh held no humor, just the bitter edge of someone who discovered that careful planning means nothing when the foundation is built on lies. He needed money for medical treatments insurance wouldn't cover, David explained, his voice gaining strength as he worked through the details. Experimental therapies, private consultations, trips to specialists across the country. He mortgaged everything to pay for treatments that didn't work, and he never told me, never asked for help, never explained why he seemed so distant lately. He picked up a letter from the pile, holding it like evidence in a trial where he was both prosecutor and defendant. This came today. We have 60 days to either bring the mortgage current or face foreclosure. Evelyn, I don't have $40,000 lying around. We don't have $40,000 lying around. 60 days felt like a death sentence for everything we'd built together. I reached across the table to take his hand, noting how cold his fingers felt despite the apartment's warmth. We'll figure this out, I said, the words feeling hollow even as I spoke them. There has to be a solution. We can talk to the bank, maybe restructure the loans, get more time. But even as I offered these optimistic possibilities, my nursing brain was already running worst-case scenarios. Losing the cafe meant losing our income. Losing the building meant losing our home. Losing everything meant starting over at 40 and 35, with no safety net and no guarantee that we could rebuild what had taken us 7 years to create. That night, I lay awake listening to David's restless breathing, both of us pretending to sleep while our minds raced through impossible calculations. How much could we raise by selling everything we owned? Would the bank accept a payment plan if we could demonstrate good faith? Could I pick up extra shifts, maybe work at multiple hospitals, to increase our income enough to make a difference? The questions multiplied faster than answers, creating a mental loop that offered no resolution. Only more anxiety. By morning, we'd both given up the pretense of sleep, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the grim determination of people preparing for battle. The call I made to Mom that morning felt like a natural progression in our crisis management strategy. I'd spent years watching my family bail Emma out of financial difficulties, from credit card debt to car payments to rent money when her latest job didn't work out. Mom had always positioned herself as the family's financial lifeline, ready to help when her daughters needed support. I dialed her number with something approaching confidence, certain that this crisis, my first real request for help as an adult, would finally demonstrate that I was as deserving of support as my sister. Mom, it's Evelyn. I know it's early, but I need to talk to you about something important. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, maintaining the calm professionalism I'd learned from years of delivering difficult news to patients' families. I could hear the morning news in the background, the familiar rhythm of her coffee routine continuing, as I explained David's father's death and the financial devastation we'd discovered. We need to borrow money to save the cafe and our home, I concluded, laying out the exact amount and our plan for repayment. I know it's a lot, but this is everything we've worked for, everything we've built together. The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. When Mom finally spoke, her voice carried the particular tone she used when discussing Emma's latest crisis, patient, slightly martyred, and somehow accusatory all at once. Oh, Evelyn, I wish you'd called yesterday. Emma just signed the papers on her new house, and I helped her with the down payment. You know how important it is for her to provide stability for the kids after the divorce. The words hit me like a physical blow, each syllable precisely designed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. Emma's needs, Emma's children, Emma's stability, all more important than my crisis, my future, my pain. How much did you give her? I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer would be devastating. The number, when it came, was almost exactly what David and I needed to save everything we'd worked for. $50,000, handed over to Emma for a house purchase while I sat in my kitchen surrounded by foreclosure notices and impossible math. I'm sure you understand, Mom continued, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when explaining why Emma's needs always came first. Emma has children to think about. She's been through so much with the divorce. You and David are both young and healthy. You'll bounce back from this. The phone call ended with promises that Mom would see what she could do and suggestions that David and I should maybe think about downsizing anyway, since the cafe was probably too much responsibility for people our age. I sat in my kitchen after hanging up, staring at the foreclosure notice while my family's priorities crystallized with perfect, devastating clarity. Emma's comfort was worth $50,000 of immediate support. My survival was worth vague promises and helpful suggestions about learning to live with less. David found me there an hour later, still holding the phone and trying to process the casual cruelty of my mother's response. When I explained the conversation, His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally a protective fury that was entirely focused on my pain rather than our financial crisis. Evelyn, that's not normal, he said, kneeling beside my chair and taking my hands in his. That's not how families treat each other. That's not how love works. His words broke something open inside me, and I finally cried, not for the money or the cafe, but for the daughter who'd spent 35 years believing she deserved less love than her sister. 3 days later, as we met with bankruptcy lawyers and discussed the logistics of losing everything we'd built, Emma called with an invitation that felt like salt in an open wound. Having a housewarming party next weekend, she announced, her voice bright with the particular enthusiasm she reserved for events where she could display her good fortune. You and David simply must come. I want you to see what I've done with the place. Mom thinks you'll just love the kitchen. It's twice the size of yours. The casual cruelty was breathtaking in its efficiency, a perfectly designed reminder of what she had and what I was losing, delivered with just enough enthusiasm to make any objection seem petty. The housewarming party became a showcase of everything wrong with my family's dynamic, a perfectly orchestrated event designed to celebrate Emma's success while I processed the destruction of my own life. The house was beautiful, sprawling suburban perfection with gleaming hardwood floors and granite countertops that cost more than David and I made in 6 months. Emma gave tours with the pride of someone showing off a hard-earned achievement, carefully omitting any mention of the maternal funding that had made it all possible. Mom followed the tour group like a proud queen, pointing out special features and praising Emma's excellent taste in everything from paint colors to cabinet hardware. I stood in Emma's kitchen, admiring the professional-grade appliances and thinking about the cafe equipment that would be repossessed within the month, when Mom cornered me near the imported tile backsplash. "Isn't this wonderful?" she asked, gesturing around the room with genuine pride. "Emma deserves this kind of stability. She's worked so hard to rebuild her life after the divorce." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Emma deserved stability and support, while I deserved whatever I was strong enough to survive on my own. The breaking point came when Emma gathered everyone in her new living room to thank Mom publicly for her incredible generosity and support in making the house purchase possible. She spoke about feeling blessed to have a mother who understood the importance of providing security for her grandchildren, about the peace of mind that came from knowing she could always count on family support when life got difficult. The applause that followed felt like mockery, a celebration of a support system that had never included me. I excused myself to the bathroom and spent 10 minutes crying quietly while the party continued without me. Driving home that evening, David broke his usual diplomatic silence about my family. "They're not good people, Evelyn," he said, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "I've tried to understand, tried to give them the benefit of the doubt, but what I saw today was deliberate cruelty. They know exactly what they're doing to you." His words gave me permission to finally admit what I'd been denying for years. My family's treatment of me wasn't an oversight or misunderstanding. It was a choice they made repeatedly, a pattern they maintained because it served their purposes to have someone designated as the strong one who didn't need help. The next week brought a cascade of new information that transformed my understanding of the family I'd grown up in. A casual conversation with my aunt revealed that Mom had actually been planning to give Emma money for months, long before David's crisis began. Emma had been house hunting with pre-approval based on a down payment she already knew was coming, making my emergency request for help nothing more than unfortunate timing that interfered with their predetermined plan. The realization that my crisis had been treated as an inconvenience rather than a priority felt like discovering I was adopted. It changed everything I thought I knew about my place in the family. But the revelation that broke me completely came from an unexpected source. Emma's 7-year-old daughter, who innocently mentioned that Grandma had been saving special money for their new house since Christmas. The child's words confirmed what I'd begun to suspect: my mother had been accumulating the exact amount needed for Emma's down payment while I'd been working double shifts to save money for our own future. Every time I'd called to share news about the cafe's success or our plans for expansion, Mom had been mentally allocating my sister's support fund, secure in the knowledge that Evelyn would figure out her own problems. The final insult came disguised as a peace offering. Mom called a week after the housewarming party with what she presented as a solution to our financial crisis. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said, her voice carrying the tone of someone delivering good news. "I talked to Emma, and we both think David should sell the cafe and find a job with more security. There's an opening at the insurance office where your father works. It's not glamorous, but it's steady income with benefits." The suggestion that David should abandon his passion and entrepreneurial success to become a cubicle drone felt like being asked to amputate healthy limbs to fit into a coffin. Emma's support for this solution came in the form of a follow-up call filled with helpful suggestions about the benefits of regular employment and the stress relief that comes from not owning a business. You'll be so much happier when you're not constantly worrying about money, she explained, apparently oblivious to the irony of delivering this advice from her mortgage-free kitchen. David can still cook as a hobby. It's not like he's losing his passion, just finding a more practical outlet for it. Her ability to diminish David's life's work to a weekend hobby demonstrated a callousness that took my breath away. The pressure campaign intensified over the following weeks, with both Mom and Emma calling regularly to reinforce their position that our financial crisis was actually an opportunity for growth and maturity. They painted our desperation to save the cafe as stubbornness, our unwillingness to abandon everything we'd built as immaturity. Sometimes life forces us to grow up and make adult decisions. Mom explained during one particularly galling conversation, you can't stay children forever, playing house with your little restaurant. The fact that she'd just funded Emma's suburban fantasy while dismissing our actual business as child's play revealed the depth of her contempt for my choices. When David finally found investors willing to partner with us to save the cafe, my family's reaction was telling. Instead of celebration or relief, they expressed disappointment that we hadn't learned our lesson about the dangers of entrepreneurship. You're just setting yourselves up for more heartbreak, Emma warned, her concern sounding performative and hollow. What happens the next time you face a crisis? You can't always count on finding someone to bail you out. The irony of receiving this lecture from someone whose house had been purchased with bailout money was apparently lost on her entirely. The breaking point came when Mom called to inform me that she'd been discussing our situation with her church prayer group, presenting our financial crisis as a teaching moment about the importance of living within our means and making responsible choices. The thought of my private pain being served up as entertainment for her social circle, complete with moral lessons about fiscal responsibility delivered by someone who'd just made a $50,000 impulse purchase for her favorite daughter, finally shattered my willingness to maintain family peace at the expense of my own dignity. 4 months after David's father's death, we'd managed to restructure our debt and find new investors, saving the cafe through a combination of determination, hard work, and the support of people who actually cared about our success. The business was thriving again, stronger than before, because we'd learned to diversify our revenue streams and build better financial safeguards. Our relationship had deepened through the crisis, with both of us gaining new appreciation for what we'd built together and new clarity about what truly mattered in our lives. But my family's response to our success was as telling as their reaction to our crisis had been. There was no acknowledgement of our achievement, no recognition of the hard work and creativity that had saved our business. Instead, there was a subtle disappointment that we hadn't been forced to conform to their vision of responsible adulthood, coupled with hints that our success was temporary, and we shouldn't get too comfortable. Well, I hope you've learned your lesson about taking on too much debt, Mom said when I called to share our good news. Though I suppose you'll probably make the same mistakes again. The conversation that finally severed my relationship with my family began innocuously enough, with Emma calling to invite us to her birthday dinner. Mom's making her famous pot roast, she announced, as if this should be inducement enough for me to drive 4 hours each way to celebrate someone who'd watched me suffer without offering help. She specifically asked me to tell you that you're welcome to come, despite everything that's happened. The phrase despite everything that's happened was classic Emma, making my reaction to their cruelty sound like an unprovoked attack on innocent people. When I declined the invitation, explaining that we had plans we couldn't change, Emma's tone shifted to the manipulative sweetness she'd perfected in childhood. Evelyn, you're being very selfish, she said, her voice taking on the wounded quality that had always preceded her most effective guilt campaigns. Mom has been so hurt by your distance lately. She doesn't understand why you're punishing her for not being able to help during your crisis. She gave me the money first, because I asked first. That's not favoritism. That's just timing. The ability to reframe years of systematic preferential treatment as a simple matter of chronological order was breathtaking in its audacity. The final conversation took place on a Tuesday afternoon in November, when Mom called with what she clearly believed was a reasonable solution to our family tension. I'd been talking to Pastor Williams about our situation, she began, immediately putting me on high alert. He thinks it would be good for all of us to sit down together and work through these hurt feelings before they cause permanent damage to our family. The suggestion that my legitimate anger about being abandoned during a crisis constituted hurt feelings that needed pastoral intervention demonstrated how completely she misunderstood the situation. The proposed family meeting was presented as an opportunity for everyone to share their perspectives and work toward reconciliation. But the agenda Mom outlined made it clear that the real purpose was to pressure me into accepting responsibility for the tension and apologizing for my unreasonable expectations. Pastor Williams says that forgiveness is a choice we make for our own healing, she explained, apparently unaware that forgiveness requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing from the person being forgiven. Emma and I are ready to forgive your harsh words and move forward. We just need you to be willing to meet us halfway. When I explained that I wouldn't be attending any meetings until they acknowledged their behavior and demonstrated genuine change, Mom's reasonable facade finally cracked. You've always been selfish, Evelyn, she said, her voice carrying decades of accumulated resentment. Even as a child, you expected special treatment just because you got good grades. Emma has children to worry about. Emma has been through a difficult divorce. You have David and your precious cafe, and no real responsibilities. You should be grateful that we're willing to welcome you back into this family after the way you've behaved. The mask was finally off, revealing the contempt that had always lurked beneath her performance of maternal love. The confrontation I'd been avoiding for 35 years finally happened at Emma's son's birthday party, an event I'd attended only because David convinced me that hiding from my family wasn't solving anything. The party was held at one of those elaborate indoor playgrounds that cater to suburban mothers with unlimited budgets, complete with hired entertainment and a candy bar that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. I watched Emma direct the festivities like a general commanding troops, orchestrating photo opportunities, and managing the guest list with military precision. The ambush came during cake time, when Mom stood up to make a toast that quickly became a speech about the importance of family unity and forgiveness. We've all been through difficult times recently, she announced to the assembled guests, but I'm so grateful that we're here together supporting each other through thick and thin. Her eyes found mine across the room, sending a clear message that this performance was for my benefit. Family means always being there for each other, no matter what challenges we face. The applause that followed felt like mockery, celebrating a version of family support that existed only in Mom's carefully crafted narrative. When I stood up to leave, Emma blocked my path with the determination of someone executing a carefully planned maneuver. We need to talk, she said, her voice low enough that the other guests couldn't hear but firm enough to brook no argument. She guided me toward the party room's back corner, where Mom joined us with the satisfied expression of someone whose trap had finally been sprung. This has gone on long enough, Evelyn, Emma continued, her maternal authority voice emerging as she positioned herself between me and the exit. Your behavior is affecting the children. They don't understand why Aunt Evelyn doesn't visit anymore. The intervention that followed was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, with both Mom and Emma taking turns explaining how my unreasonable expectations and inability to let go of grudges were damaging the family's harmony. They painted themselves as victims of my selfishness, forced to walk on eggshells around my sensitivity while dealing with their own legitimate struggles. We've all made mistakes, Mom said, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining obvious truths to a slow child. But healthy people forgive and move forward. They don't hold on to anger and use it to punish people who love them. Emma's contribution focused on the practical damage my behavior was causing to family traditions and relationships. The kids are starting to ask why you're never at family events anymore, she said, deploying her children as emotional weapons with practiced efficiency. Do you really want to be the aunt they remember as the one who abandoned them because she didn't get her way? The suggestion that I was abandoning children rather than protecting myself from toxic adults was both cruel and effective, designed to trigger the guilt that had controlled my behavior for decades. When I finally found my voice, it came out stronger and clearer than I'd expected. You're right that someone is being selfish here, I said, looking directly at Mom while the party continued around us. But it's not me. I asked for help during the worst crisis of my adult life, and you chose to give that help to someone who didn't need it because her needs were more important to you than mine. That's not a mistake or an oversight. That's a choice you made about who matters in this family. The words felt like armor, protecting me from their attempts to rewrite history. The silence that followed was charged with years of unspoken truths finally being acknowledged. Mom's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally, the cold calculation of someone whose manipulation tactics weren't working. If that's how you see it, she said, her voice carrying the finality of someone closing a door, then maybe you're right that you don't belong in this family. Maybe it's better for everyone if you stay away until you can learn to appreciate what you have instead of focusing on what you think you deserve. Emma's response was swift and decisive, designed to inflict maximum damage while maintaining her position as the reasonable one. I think Mom's right, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone delivering a verdict. You've changed, Evelyn. The sister I grew up with would never have been this vindictive over money. Maybe being with David has made you think you're better than the rest of us. The suggestion that my relationship with someone who actually loved me had somehow corrupted my character was the final insult, revealing how deeply they resented my happiness. Walking out of that party felt like emerging from underwater, each step toward the exit clearing my vision and expanding my lungs. David was waiting in the parking lot, having given me space to handle the confrontation, but staying close enough to provide support when I needed it. "How did it go?" he asked, though my expression probably answered his question before I opened my mouth. "About as well as you'd expect," I replied, feeling lighter than I had in months despite the pain of what had just happened. "But it's over now, finally over." The aftermath of our confrontation unfolded exactly as I'd expected, with both Mom and Emma launching a coordinated campaign to reframe the situation and recruit allies to their cause. Extended family members started receiving carefully edited versions of our conflict, designed to position me as the unreasonable aggressor who'd torn apart a loving family over money. The phone calls started within days, well-meaning relatives who'd been told just enough truth to make their concerns seem legitimate while leaving out crucial details that would have changed their perspective entirely. The flying monkeys, as David dubbed them, arrived with predictable messages about the importance of family forgiveness and the damage that prolonged conflict could cause to everyone involved. "Your mother is heartbroken," my aunt informed me during a particularly galling conversation. "She doesn't understand what she did wrong. Emma says you're angry about some business loan that didn't work out, but families shouldn't let money come between them." The ability to reduce my abandonment during a crisis to some business loan that didn't work out demonstrated how effectively Mom and Emma had controlled the narrative. The most painful part of the smear campaign was watching extended family members I'd always respected accept the simplified version of events without asking for my perspective. Cousins who'd known me my entire life suddenly viewed me as the family troublemaker, the ungrateful daughter who'd chosen money over relationships. Holiday invitations stopped coming, not because I was explicitly excluded, but because my presence would create tension that might spoil everyone else's enjoyment. I found myself erased from family gatherings and conversations, becoming a cautionary tale about what happens when selfishness destroys family bonds. But the attempts at public shaming backfired when some family members started asking questions that Mom and Emma couldn't answer satisfactorily. Why had Evelyn's first ever request for help been denied while Emma received regular financial support? What exactly had Evelyn said that was so terrible it justified cutting off contact? Why did the story change slightly each time it was told, with new details that painted Evelyn in an increasingly negative light? Slowly, quietly, some relatives began reaching out to me directly, asking for my version of events and expressing shock at what they learned. The legal threats came next, delivered through Emma's divorce attorney in the form of a cease and desist letter that accused me of harassment and defamation. Apparently, my honest conversations with family members about what had actually happened constituted a malicious campaign to damage Emma's reputation and hurt her children's relationship with their grandmother. The letter demanded that I stop spreading lies about family members and threatened legal action if I continued to interfere with their peaceful enjoyment of family relationships. The absurdity of being legally threatened for telling the truth about my own experiences would have been laughable if it hadn't been so devastating. David's response to the legal threats was swift and protective, with him consulting our own attorney and preparing a detailed response that included documentation of everything Mom and Emma had said and done. "They're betting that you'll back down rather than fight," he explained, his anger on my behalf evident in every word. "They're counting on your desire to avoid conflict to let them win by default. But Evelyn, you have every right to tell your own story. You have every right to warn people about how they treat family members who need help." His support gave me the strength to stand firm, refusing to be silenced by threats and intimidation. The turning point came when Emma's oldest daughter, now 15 and old enough to understand adult dynamics, asked her mother directly why Aunt Evelyn never visited anymore. Emma's explanation, overheard by my cousin who was babysitting at the time, finally revealed the full extent of their willingness to lie to maintain their narrative. Aunt Evelyn got very angry when Grandma couldn't loan her money for her restaurant, Emma had said, apparently unaware that her daughter was sophisticated enough to recognize the gap between this explanation and the elaborate house tour she'd given just months earlier. My cousin's call that evening changed everything, providing me with a witness to Emma's manipulation and an ally who finally understood the true scope of what I'd been dealing with. "I always wondered why you stopped coming to family events," she admitted, her voice carrying the weight of someone realizing they'd been deceived. but I believed them when they said you were going through a difficult phase and needed space. I had no idea they'd actually refuse to help you when you were in crisis. That's not the Evelyn I've known my whole life. Her validation meant more than I could express, confirming that the reasonable, supportive family member everyone remembered wasn't a fiction I'd created in my own mind. The final confrontation took place at the one venue where Emma and Mom couldn't control the narrative or restrict my access. My grandmother's funeral, 6 months after our birthday party disaster. Grandma had been the family matriarch, the one person whose love for me had never felt conditional or competitive. Her death represented the loss of my last meaningful connection to my family of origin, but it also provided an opportunity to address our situation in front of witnesses who couldn't be manipulated or excluded from the conversation. Emma approached me during the visitation with her usual blend of authority and wounded innocence, clearly intending to stage another intervention in front of our relatives. "I think Grandma would want us to reconcile," she began, her voice carrying the practiced grief that had served her well during previous family crises. She always said family was the most important thing in life. She wouldn't want her death to be marked by continued fighting between her granddaughters. The attempt to weaponize our grandmother's memory for her own purposes was breathtaking in its audacity, but I was ready for it this time. "You're absolutely right that Grandma valued family above everything else," I replied, my voice carrying clearly enough for nearby relatives to hear every word. "She also taught us that family members take care of each other during difficult times, that love is demonstrated through actions rather than words. She would be horrified to know that you received $50,000 for a house down payment on the same day I was told that my business crisis wasn't a family priority." The gasps from listening relatives were audible, indicating that this crucial detail had been omitted from previous versions of our story. Mom's intervention was swift and desperate, attempting to silence me before more truth could emerge. "This is neither the time nor the place for this discussion," she hissed, her voice carrying the authority she'd wielded over me for decades. "Your grandmother's funeral should be about honoring her memory, not airing family grievances." But her attempt to claim the moral high ground backfired when my cousin stepped forward with information that changed the entire dynamic of the conversation. "Actually, I think Evelyn's right that this is exactly what Grandma would want us to discuss," my cousin said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd been trusted with family secrets. "Because Grandma knew about the money situation, and she was upset about it. She told me before she died that she was disappointed in how Evelyn was being treated, and she was considering changing her will to address the imbalance." The revelation that our grandmother had witnessed Emma's preferential treatment and planned to correct it sent shockwaves through the assembled family members. The will reading the following week confirmed what my cousin had revealed. Grandma had indeed restructured her bequests to address what she saw as unfair treatment within the family. While Emma received sentimental items and a modest cash gift, the bulk of Grandma's estate, including her house and investment accounts, had been left to me, along with a letter explaining her decision. "Evelyn has always been the family member who gives more than she receives." The letter read in part, "I'm leaving her these resources, not because she needs them, but because she's earned them through years of supporting others without expecting anything in return." The letter continued with observations that validated everything I'd experienced but had been afraid to voice. "I've watched my daughter show favoritism toward Emma for years, always finding excuses for why Emma's needs should come first. I've seen Evelyn work twice as hard for half the recognition, always being told she's strong enough to handle whatever life throws at her. Strength shouldn't be punished with abandonment. Love shouldn't be conditional on never needing help." Reading Grandma's words felt like receiving permission to finally acknowledge the truth of my own experiences. Emma's reaction to the will was predictably focused on the financial loss rather than the emotional validation it represented. She immediately contacted an attorney to challenge the bequest, claiming that Grandma had been manipulated or wasn't mentally competent when she made the changes. The irony of someone who'd just inherited a house through family financial support, claiming that inherited money was somehow unfair, was lost on her entirely. Her willingness to drag our family through legal proceedings rather than accept Grandma's decision revealed the depth of her entitlement and her inability to conceive of a world where her needs weren't automatically prioritized. Mom's response was more complex, alternating between anger at being implicitly criticized by her own mother and attempts to position herself as the injured party who'd somehow been betrayed by both Grandma and me. "Mother always had a soft spot for you," she told me during one particularly bitter phone conversation. She never understood that Emma needed more support because she'd been through more difficulties. She saw favoritism where there was just practical help for the daughter who needed it most. The ability to reframe decades of preferential treatment as practical assistance demonstrated how completely she'd internalized her own narrative. The legal challenge to Grandma's will lasted 8 months, during which Emma and Mom worked tirelessly to prove that I'd somehow influenced or manipulated a 92-year-old woman who'd been sharp as a tack until the day she died. Their case fell apart when Grandma's attorney testified about the detailed conversations they'd had regarding her decision, including specific examples of family dynamics she'd witnessed over the years. The judge's dismissal of their challenge was accompanied by comments about the frivolous nature of their claims and the obvious validity of Grandma's concerns about family favoritism. The settlement of Grandma's estate provided me with financial security I'd never expected, but more importantly, it offered vindication of my perceptions and experiences. For the first time in my adult life, I had concrete proof that someone who loved me had witnessed the same patterns I'd experienced, validating my decision to protect myself from further damage. The money itself was less important than the message it sent. I deserve support. My contributions to the family had been valuable, and my pain had been real and justified. 2 years after our final confrontation, my relationship with my family of origin exists only in the legal sense. We share DNA and some childhood memories, but we have no ongoing connection or communication. Emma and Mom have apparently rebuilt their dynamic around shared victimhood, telling anyone who'll listen about the ungrateful daughter and sister who chose money over family. They've created a narrative where they're the injured parties, abandoned by someone they loved, despite their best efforts to maintain relationships. The absence of their drama from my life has been revelatory, like recovering from a chronic illness I didn't realize was draining my energy. Without the constant need to manage their emotions and expectations, I've rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried under decades of people pleasing. David and I have built a chosen family from friends, colleagues, and customers who value our contributions and support our dreams. The cafe has become a gathering place for people who understand that authentic relationships require mutual respect and genuine care. The healing process hasn't been linear or simple. There are still moments when I catch myself wondering if I was too harsh, if I should have tried harder to make things work, if cutting contact was an overreaction to what they'd probably describe as a simple misunderstanding. But then I remember the birthday party confrontation, the legal threats, the systematic rewriting of history to make me the villain in my own story. I remember how it felt to be abandoned during the worst crisis of my adult life, and I know that protecting myself from further damage wasn't selfish. It was necessary. The hardest part has been accepting that some people will always believe their version of events, viewing me as the troubled family member who couldn't forgive and move on. Extended relatives who weren't present for the worst of our interactions sometimes make comments about hoping I'll eventually come around, assuming that time will heal wounds they don't understand were intentionally inflicted. Learning to live with being misunderstood by people whose opinions matter to me has been one of the most difficult aspects of this entire experience. But the benefits of setting boundaries have far outweighed the costs. My marriage with David has deepened into something neither of us imagined possible when we first met over blueberry scones and nursing textbooks. Without the constant drain of managing my family's dysfunction, I've had energy to invest in friendships, professional development, and creative projects that bring me joy. The cafe has expanded into the full restaurant we'd always dreamed of, becoming a cornerstone of our community and a source of pride that no one can diminish or take away. If you're watching this and recognizing patterns from your own family experience, I want you to know that you're not imagining things, and you're not being too sensitive. Families that operate on systems of favoritism and conditional love count on maintaining those systems by making the unfavored members doubt their own perceptions. They rely on cultural messages about forgiveness and family loyalty to keep their victims silent and compliant. But you have the right to protect yourself from people who consistently choose to hurt you, even if those people are related to you by blood. The signs of toxic family dynamics are often subtle but consistent. Your needs are always secondary to someone else's wants. Your successes are minimized while someone else's mediocrity is celebrated. You're expected to provide support, but never allowed to receive it. And any attempt to address these patterns is met with accusations that you're being unreasonable or vindictive. If you find yourself constantly walking on eggshells, making excuses for family members' behavior, or feeling guilty for having needs and expectations, you're probably dealing with people who've learned to exploit your love and loyalty for their own benefit. Setting boundaries with toxic family members requires accepting that you can't change them or convince them to treat you better. You can only control your own responses and protect yourself from further damage. This might mean limiting contact, refusing to engage in certain conversations, or in extreme cases, cutting contact entirely. Whatever level of protection you need is valid and appropriate, regardless of what other people think you should do. Your mental health and emotional well being are more important than maintaining family peace that exists only because you're absorbing all the dysfunction. The process of healing from family trauma takes time and often requires professional support. A good therapist can help you identify unhealthy patterns, develop coping strategies, and rebuild your sense of self worth after years of being told you don't matter. Support groups for adult children of dysfunctional families can provide validation and practical advice from people who understand your experience. Books about toxic families, narcissistic abuse, and boundary setting can offer frameworks for understanding what you've endured and tools for moving forward. Remember that choosing yourself over family dysfunction isn't selfish, it's survival. The people who truly love you will support your decision to protect yourself, even if they don't fully understand the dynamics that made protection necessary. The people who criticize your boundaries or pressure you to reconcile without requiring change from the other parties are showing you that they prioritize appearance over your actual well being. Their opinions about your choices matter far less than your own safety and peace of mind. Building a chosen family from friends, partners, colleagues, and mentors who actually support your growth and happiness is one of the most healing things you can do after experiencing family rejection or abandonment. These relationships show you what healthy love looks like: consistent, supportive, and unconditional. They demonstrate that you are worthy of care and respect, that your needs matter, and that real family is defined by behavior rather than biology. If you're currently dealing with family members who refuse to acknowledge their harmful behavior or change their treatment of you, please know that you're not alone in this struggle. Thousands of people are watching this video because they recognize the patterns I've described, because they've experienced similar betrayals and dismissals. You deserve better than being treated as less important than other family members. You deserve support during crises. You deserve to have your contributions recognized and your feelings validated. The decision to protect yourself from toxic family members is never easy, but it's often necessary for your own growth and healing. Don't let anyone convince you that biology obligates you to accept mistreatment or that forgiveness requires subjecting yourself to continued abuse. Real forgiveness happens after acknowledgement and change, not as a precursor to more of the same harmful behavior. You have the right to demand better treatment, and you have the right to remove yourself from situations where that better treatment isn't forthcoming. I'm sharing my story not for sympathy or validation, but because isolation is one of the weapons toxic families use to maintain control over their victims. When you believe you're the only one experiencing these patterns, you're more likely to doubt your own perceptions and accept treatment you'd never tolerate from strangers. Knowing that others have faced similar challenges and successfully freed themselves from toxic dynamics can provide hope and practical guidance for your own journey toward healing. Thank you for watching and for allowing me to share this difficult but important story. If this resonated with your own experiences, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what aspects of family dysfunction you've had to navigate. Subscribe to join a community of people who understand that sometimes loving yourself means stepping away from people who refuse to love you properly. Your story matters, your pain is valid, and your future is worth protecting, even when that protection requires difficult choices that others don't understand.